Hey, what is up everybody? It's Animac here for Anime Uproar, and a massive quirk evolution just happened right before our eyes, and this is only the beginning. The raging fight against All For One just gave us some big hints about how the final battle between Shigaraki and Deku might end. And by the time this war is over, Deku may no longer be what we think of as human. Horikoshi is still keeping a secret about how All For One and One For All really work, and this secret is about to be revealed, so let's get into it. You guys know the drill. If you enjoy our MHA videos and you want us to keep them going, leave a quick like and comment right now. It only takes you a second, but it really helps us out with that YouTube algorithm. And if you're one of the over 50% of people who watch our videos but still haven't taken the time to subscribe, do me a big favor and subscribe right now. Subscribing on YouTube is completely free, but it helps me out a lot. Finally, this video will of course contain MHA manga spoilers, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. In the previous chapter, we saw multiple important developments, including Aizawa and Present Mike being saved from falling to their deaths by Kurogiri, but then also being transported to an unknown location. This means that while both of them are likely safe, erasing Shigaraki's quirk using Aizawa's quirk is no longer a possibility. And although the floating UA building is no longer in danger of crashing to the ground, and everyone on board is safe for the time being, the final showdown between Deku and full power Shigaraki, who now has full use of all his quirks, is only just beginning. The focus then switched over to Gunga, where All For One confirmed that he needs to physically reach Shigaraki in order to force his rebellious new vessel to obey him. He will do this by placing All For One's quirk factor inside of Shigaraki's body, and this will then somehow destroy Shigaraki's ability to fight back against All For One's control. But even before All For One confirmed this, Hawks had a feeling that the heroes had to do their best to keep All For One from leaving Gunga and getting to Shigaraki. So these new revelations only further emphasized that Hawks was right. The chapter ended with the injured and exhausted heroes at Gunga getting some much needed reinforcements courtesy of the hero students from Shiketsu High, Kami, Seiji, and Inasa. Oh, and something else was revealed in the last chapter that might seem small, but I actually think it's very important. We learned that civilians from the UA shelters were supposed to be evacuated by the Shiketsu High students, but they never arrived at the scheduled meeting point. Something went wrong with the evacuation. Pay attention to this piece of information because it will come up in future chapters. The latest chapter starts off with the three Shiketsu students taking center stage. Seiji declares that All For One murdered his father, who was of course one of the guards at Tartarus who died bravely while trying to prevent the prison break. He is the one that talked to Stain before he died. And even though Seiji obviously wants revenge for what happened to his father, he vows not to let his hatred for All For One blind him and control his actions. Because if that happened, then he would be playing right into the villain's hands. For his part, Inasa has been able to effectively neutralize the threat posed by Toga and Sadman's Parade, at least for the time being. He's been using his extremely powerful wind quirk to sweep both Toga and the clones up into the air. And of course, they can't do much damage while being tossed around by Inasa's artificial tornadoes. However, we have to remember that this is only a temporary solution to the Toga problem. If anything happens to Inasa and he loses the ability to use his quirk, Toga will be released and Sadman's Parade will continue. That said, this is the time for everyone to focus their attacks on All For One. And that is exactly what every available hero and hero student does. They know that whatever happens here at Gunga will determine the outcome of the entire war. If All For One can be stopped here long enough for his body to rewind itself out of existence, the war could be over soon after that. But if All For One can reach Shigaraki and reassert control of his overpowered vessel, then the heroes will almost certainly lose the war and Japan will be lost. All For One tries touching one of Twice's clones as it zooms through the air, presumably to steal Twice's quirk and use it for himself, but it doesn't work. All For One can only steal someone's quirk if he touches their body directly, and touching a clone doesn't do the trick. The heroes are aware of this, and that is why initially only two of the strongest heroes were attacking All For One directly, Endeavor and Hawks. But now the situation has changed. Endeavor is currently occupied trying to subdue a completely berserk Dabi, and the heroes are so desperate to stop All For One from reaching Shigaraki that they are now willing to attack him all at once. All For One thinks that this is an excellent development. It's a great opportunity for him to steal some quirks, and he proceeds to unleash even more stolen quirks at once in order to create a massive super attack. All the heroes and hero students are working together to defend against All For One's attacks, while also trying to hit back at him at the same time. But even with Toga neutralized, All For One isn't worried. He believes that the only hero who could possibly threaten him was Endeavor, and with him currently preoccupied with Dabi, All For One believes that he simply cannot lose. Interestingly enough, being overconfident seems to be a major character flaw for All For One. You wouldn't necessarily think that this would be the case because he plans things so thoroughly and he has like 10 backup plans for every main plan. So he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would underestimate his opponents. And yet, at the moment, he appears to be doing exactly that, unless he's just talking smack in order to manipulate the heroes into losing confidence in themselves. All For One claims that what the heroes are doing now isn't even bravery, because most of them have no idea who he really is. They are too young to remember his golden age, when he ruled all of Japan from the shadows and everyone was afraid of him. These heroes and hero students grew up during the Age of Peace created by All Might, but that age is now over. As Game of Thrones would put it, these heroes are Knights of Summer, but winter is coming. But Inasa claps back at All For One. He refuses to give into the fear that All For One is projecting, because according to Inasa, boiling blood will always triumph over fear. Man, Inasa is easily my favorite student outside of Class 1A. He kind of reminds me of those epic inspirational anime characters that I absolutely love, like Kamina from Gurren Lagann. Anyway, at this point, Inasa has created some sort of wind sphere around All For One in order to prevent him from leaving. And all the other heroes are sending their attacks into that space in an attempt to destroy All For One. The villain realizes just how powerful Inasa's quirk is, and he decides to steal it before taking off to find Shigaraki. He launches those black tendrils from the Rivet Stab quirk at the heroes, and he manages to graze Inasa. But Inasa doesn't stop his attack, and he declares that his quirk is even stronger than usual because it's a windy day, so he refuses to let up now. Again though, All For One is not worried. He knows that none of the heroes can come close to him out of fear that he will steal their quirks, so all they can do is attack from afar. That means that All For One can just use Rivet Stab and other long-range quirks to pick the heroes off one by one, and eventually he will win and they will lose. Unless... As it turns out, the fact that this chapter mentioned multiple times that All For One needs to make physical contact with someone's actual body in order to steal their quirk was no coincidence. Just as the villain is busy bragging about how no one would dare come close to him, a massive menacing shadow appears right behind him, and this shadow dwarfs him in size. All For One feels something disturbing behind him, and he turns around quickly and then sees Tokoyami's quirk, Dark Shadow, at full power staring down at him. We see a cute little panel of Tokoyami as a child tucked into bed with a little baby Dark Shadow, and in the present, the giant Dark Shadow tells All For One that even darkness comes in different shades. No one ever crowned All For One the King of the Shadows, and the darkness he was casting was only absorbed by Dark Shadow, and it will now come crashing down on top of him. We learn that as dark clouds blocked out the sun on the battlefield, and as the flames of the forest fire created by Dabi settled down, Dark Shadow was able to grow in strength and in size until it reached its full potential. Dark Shadow even had Pixie Bob secretly cover it up with dirt earlier on so that it could gather as much darkness as possible in preparation for this attack. All of this was planned ahead of time by Tokoyami and Dark Shadow. The heroes knew that All For One had to touch someone's body directly in order to steal their quirk, And because Tokoyami's quirk can extend far away from his body, they knew that Tokoyami would have the best chance of taking All For One on head to head. So Tokoyami started preparing as soon as the Shiketsu students arrived, and now is his time to shine. Or I guess the opposite of shine. Now is his time to obscure? Anyway, Tokoyami announces a new move called Black Ankh Balder as the giant dark shadow collapses upon All For One and seemingly crushes him into the ground. On that epic note, this chapter comes to an end. And honestly, I've been wondering when we were actually going to see full power Dark Shadow again. And man, what a way to bring it back in an absolutely clutch moment. Tokoyami's control over his quirk has come so freaking far since the beginning of the story. I remember back during the forest training camp arc, Tokoyami lost control of Dark Shadow completely and it went berserk. And even though the quirk was clearly incredibly strong, it was also really dangerous, and not just for Tokoyami's opponents, but for his allies as well. Things have changed a lot since then, in part because of Tokoyami's commitment and training, and in part because of the great mentorship he received from Hawks and others. Fun fact, but in the next few days I'm going to release a massive video explaining all 20 quirks in Class 1A, including all the new quirk updates and upgrades as of the final arc of the story. If you want to check that out, be sure to subscribe and click that bell so you will get notified when the video drops. Personally, I think this was a great chapter that made excellent use of the supporting characters in order to show that they are all contributing to the battle against All For One. Hawks, Tokoyami, the Shiketsu students, and even Pixie Bob are all playing an important role. And that's exactly the kind of teamwork I love to see during a major battle. But is it possible for these guys to actually defeat All For One right here and now, even with Dark Shadow at full power? I mean, the story is heavily hinting that the real Shigaraki will be the final villain, and that Old Man All For One is on his way out. So there is a possibility of him being defeated here, but I don't think so. I do think he will be defeated, but I see it happening on the main battlefield where Shigaraki and Deku are currently located. I do believe that All For One will fail in his attempt to regain control of Shigaraki, but it would be pretty anticlimactic if he died or was defeated right here, and neither Deku or Shigaraki even got to see it happen. And then all those theories about All For One being Deku's father and the two of them having a Darth Vader and Luke moment at the end would go right out the window. And we know that would crush the dreams of so many MHA fan theorists who are also Star Wars fans. People like my editor, 414 Anime. Shout out to him, he's a huge weeb and nerd, and we love him. My guess is that All For One, albeit a weakened All For One, will probably make it back to Shigaraki, but once he gets there, he will fail to achieve his goal of subjugating Shigaraki to his will. That battlefield is where he will ultimately die in front of Deku and Shigaraki. What do you guys think? Do you agree with me that this is All For One's ultimate fate? Let me know down below. The epic evolution of Tokoyami's quirk does offer us some interesting insight about other quirks as well, and this chapter gave us some potential hints about the true nature of One For All. A few chapters ago, it was established that a secret link connects the One For All quirk and the All For One quirk. Probably because One For All was literally created by All For One, so the connection has always been there. As a result, the One For All vestiges can actually sense what is going on inside Shigaraki. It's like the One For All quirk factor is somehow connected to the All For One quirk factor. This chapter also had a moment where Hawks was reflecting on the fact that One For All is a network of power that links hearts together. And these links seem to go beyond the quirk itself. Because all of these heroes and hero students who are fighting together and risking their lives together have forged their own links and linked their own hearts together. So, it is as if the One For All quirk has power beyond just its users and former users. It is as if it has the power to bring people together for a common cause. Yes, it works primarily through its actual users like Deku, but these users then seem to influence the world in a very specific way. A way that brings people together in a common struggle against the evil of All For One. And this makes me wonder, in what way will the inherent connection between the quirk factors of All For One and One For All come into play during the final battle. What will happen with the All For One quirk factor when the villain All For One tries to insert it into Shigaraki against his will in order to reassert his control over his vessel? What if All For One isn't able to put his quirk factor into Shigaraki, so in a desperate attempt to stay alive, he tries to insert it into Deku instead? What would happen if the quirk factors of both One For All and All For One found themselves trapped within a single body, the body of Deku? Would Deku then be subject to control by All For One, or would the vestiges fight him off? Would Deku's personality change? Would he gain new dark powers? Would this affect the bonds that he has formed with the people around him? I am almost certain that All For One will fail in his attempt to control Shigaraki, but it would be crazy if, in a desperate final move, he tried to control Deku instead. It would be especially crazy if the All For One quirk factor ended up being extremely compatible with Deku's body, because Deku is actually All For One's secret son. There you go, All For One daddy theorists, I threw you guys a bone. The Darth Vader All For One and Luke Deku theory lives. Do you guys think that All For One placing his quirk factor into Deku is possible, and what would happen if that really took place? Would Deku stay the same thanks to help from the vestiges? Would he lose control of his body to All For One? Or would he change into some sort of third personality? A persona with new dark powers which combines both All For One and One For All and is no longer even human. A persona with unlimited quirks at his disposal. A quirk god. Don't forget to share your feedback down in the comments below. If you enjoy our MHA videos and you want to see more in the future, leave a quick like and comment, it helps me out a lot. And if you still haven't taken the time to subscribe to the Anime Uproar channel, do me a big favor and make this the video that you subscribe and hit that notification bell to turn on all notifications. Subscribing might seem like a small thing to you, but it helps me out a lot. You can also hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at Anime Uproar. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys!